Hello and welcome to The Loop. I'm Susan Ball, a tax partner at RSM specialising in employment-related tax matters. The Loop is where we untangle today's business issues by throwing real-life scenarios at a panel of experts and ask them to deliver practical advice on how to tackle current business issues. This episode is part of our mini-series dedicated to all things tax and the wider profession. My guest for this episode is a leading light in the profession, Julia Penny. Julia qualified as accountant in 1998, having first completed an honours degree in accountancy and finance at Brighton Polytechnic. Soon after qualifying, Julia moved into training, initially teaching students and later moving into CPD training and technical roles, specialising in audit, financial reporting, anti-money laundering, and working for diverse organisations, including actually previously RSM. Currently, though, she's self-employed and also the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales President. Julia, welcome to The Loop.
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I guess there's quite a lot we could talk about, but I wanted to sort of take you back to the beginning, if I may. I kind of fell into tax personally, and my careers advice at school wasn't that great. I remember thinking at one point I might even work in a museum. And I ended up with a temporary job at Customs and Excise, and then was persuaded to apply for what was an open competition apprenticeship scheme with government, and was offered a place in the Inland Revenue. And I guess that's what kind of set me on the road to tax. But how did you become a chartered accountant, and what was your experience of careers advice at school?
Well, interestingly, the first shot that the careers advisor had for me at school was I should be a food scientist, because I liked cooking and I liked science. So you could see the logic of it. But somehow it wasn't really sort of making me feel excited about doing that. And so I sat in the sixth form library, I have to say, probably only weeks before my A-levels, with the A to Z of careers. I got all the way down to ACC for accountant, which was about halfway down the first column on the first page. So either I'm just not very determined, or I just found the right thing very early on in the search. Having decided I wanted to be an accountant, I went to the careers advisor, and I did that time get what I thought was some very good advice, which was, if you want to be an accountant, you should be an ICAEW accountant. They're the best. But you had to, at the time, you had to go to a polytechnic and do a year's foundation course at least before you could join the profession. You couldn't go in as a school leaver, which is what I really wanted to do. But having gone off to Brighton Polytechnic to do a year's foundation, it ran concurrently with the degree. And I sort of quite enjoyed it. And I got persuaded by the tutors there, well, why don't you stay and do a degree? So I sort of accidentally did a degree in accounting and finance.
Later on in your career, you must have got involved with the Institute. You're now the president of it. But what was the process? How did that happen? And how did you end up effectively as the president?
I got made redundant on the first day back off maternity leave after my first child. And I thought, oh my goodness, I was only 3 years post-qualification at that point in time. What am I going to do now? I've just been made redundant. And a previous boss said, well, you could go freelance. I was teaching students at the time. I was doing exam tuition. And I thought, well, okay. I went freelance as a tutor, worked at various places that people will be familiar with, and companies that have now disappeared. But what I found was I didn't have that network of colleagues that I was used to discuss technical things, to discuss new developments. And so when I saw an advert in my local magazine, they wanted new committee members on their technical committee, on their main committee. And I thought, that would be my colleagues, if you like, in an institute pot that I was missing in being freelance. So I joined my main committee. I joined the technical committee locally in Thames Valley. Even became president in Thames Valley when I was 36, some years later. And so, that was where my involvement with the Institute started. I've done a lot of that over the years. And then in more recent times, I got involved centrally rather more. So I joined committees in London, so to speak, albeit now, of course, they're all international. Joined council, joined board of ICAEW in 2017. So it all sort of started there. And from being a council member, you can put yourself forward for the election for vice president. And if you're successful, you go vice president, deputy president, president. It did take a few goes, if I'm honest. It wasn't, first time success. But I thought, well, there's not a lot to lose apart from a little bit of pride. So I kept going. And yes, so I did get elected vice president a few years ago, and hence I'm in the position that I am now.
It's amazing, because it's not dissimilar actually to my own situation, although thankfully I didn't have the starting point that you did, but I ended up going to work for a law firm, and there weren't a large number of tax people in the law firm, and I wanted to have some fellow tax people to talk to. So I pitched up at some of the local branch meetings, which I had been to before, but I was very much more enthusiastic, of course, at that point in time, and ended up, in fact, setting up a local branch. And that kind of set on my path, which was not dissimilar then from local branch through to national committees, and then on to council, and then being elected president. So for the role of presidency at ICAEW, what does that actually entail? Is it interesting, a full-time job?
It's definitely full-time. It's an honorary post. It's for a year only. And we are changing what's going to happen. So I'll explain what I've been doing, which is, on the one hand, chairing the board. And the other side of it is what I would call the ambassadorial side. So meeting lots of members. So I've met members all over the country, all over the world. We've got quite a lot of students who train overseas, about a quarter of them, and members overseas. There are sort of a bit shy of 20%. So I've been lucky enough, well, for it not to be a pandemic year, which has been very nice, to be able to meet people in person. That role in terms of the ambassadorial is listening to members, listening to other stakeholders, but also talking about our strategy, our role as an institute, making sure that our members and others understand what ICAEW is all about. So I think, one of the great parts of it, I don't know if you get to do these at CIOT as well, is new members ceremonies, where you welcome in the newest of the members of ICAEW. Always such lovely occasions, because, of course, because we all remember taking exams and the pressures and whatever, that lovely joy of, right, now I've joined, I've done that. Obviously, realising later on in life that that's really only the start.
No, absolutely, and we do have a similar, and mine wasn't that long ago when I was able to hand over the certificates to everybody. It's great meeting the students who've passed, obviously, and also their families who've supported them. So you explained a little bit about the governing body, and obviously we're in a similar situation in that I also chaired our board, and did a lot of the ambassadorial role. But I understand that some of that's changing at ICAEW, and perhaps you would like to explain a little bit about what's going to happen in the future.
Definitely been doing a governance review for a little while now, because it's quite complicated. It takes quite a long time. One of the key things that's going to change, and one of the first things that's going to change, is that we're going to get an independent chair. And by independent, I mean, not the president, because with the best will in the world, being a chair for a year of something does give you a little bit of a cliff edge at the end. I chaired my last board meeting yesterday, and it's like, oh, but all of those things that I've been working on, that the board as a whole have been working on, it's a bit disruptive, to put it mildly, to change every year. So we'll be moving to hiring a chair of the board who will be in place for sort of 3 years, renewable a couple of extra times, along the lines of normal corporate governance rules. And that way, we think that consistency will help to drive, even more effectiveness from our board, better agility, and better visibility, perhaps, showing the world, how good corporate governance looks in practice. So we're very excited about this. And as I say, we are currently recruiting, therefore, for a chair of the board. So that means that the presidents that are coming in immediately after me will probably chair for some months, because it takes a few months usually to recruit. But then after that, they will be able to focus on the ambassadorial role. I think it will be a positive split. The president can really concentrate on all of that ambassadorial stuff, and the chair of the board can concentrate on driving forward on a more consistent basis everything that the board wants to deliver for the institute.
Well, it sounds like an exciting development, and I know you've, from having had a look, obviously you've got some very key strategic themes going forward. Perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about those as well, because there's some exciting stuff in there.
There is. Our 5 strategic themes are very much they're the 2020 to 2030 strategic themes, so our 10-year strategy, and it is strengthening trust in the profession, which, to be honest, I think always has to happen. One of the things with the profession is We are the trusted advisors that people come to, the trusted auditors, the trusted tax professionals, whatever. And therefore, you constantly have to work on trust. But then we move perhaps out of where people would expect. So helping to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, transformation of trade and economy, making sure it works. We've got lots of labour changes. We've got potentially tax changes. We've got different ways of working. Mastering technology and data. I mean, look at the developments we've seen in AI just over the last few months compared to the next generation. And that's without talking about data analytics and all of the accounting software, the audit software that is just a routine part of our lives these days. And attracting talent and building diversity. We need to strengthen the profession by attracting talent, because you don't really carry on as a successful profession if people stop wanting to join you. But also, we need to build the diversity, because if you don't have diversity in today's world, you don't get enough different views. You don't understand enough about what's going on in the world, what might be the risks, the opportunities. You don't make good decisions. And you have to be fair. People want to live in a fair society where people of all sorts of different backgrounds, for instance, see that they get a chance. We had an anniversary of our first woman member a couple of years ago, who was 100 years prior to that. But it took a long time for females to be allowed to join. We've moved a long way from that. Now we want to measure, how well are we doing? How well are our committees showing that we are diverse? How well are we doing with our student recruitment? Across the whole board, what are we doing on diversity? And are we making sure that we are accessible to everybody, that people can make really good careers, whatever their background, whatever their diverse characteristics might be? Women, clearly not a minority, but nonetheless, sometimes it feels like it when you're in the accountancy profession.
We're both the fourth females to hold our president's roles, actually, in our institutes. How do you think we're going to move that forward sufficiently on a diversity agenda? What would you like to see more of that we can change that helps develop the future?
I think a lot of it is about measuring. What gets measured gets managed. We've seen things come out like the gender pay gap. That does seem to be making small improvements in that area, because all of a sudden you can see what's going on. Seeing what's going on is the first step. What you've then got to be able to do is act on what's going on. So increasingly, I think what we need, whether it's talking about members, new students, volunteers on our committees, we need to make sure that we know, well, what have we got from a diverse point of view? And we need to make people feel confident to declare what they've got. You can't make somebody answer a diversity monitoring form, but if they're confident you're going to use it in the right way, then hopefully people think, well, yes, it would be a good thing for me to say, what my aspect of diversity is. When you can measure it, you can then say, okay, so what are we missing? For instance, the fourth female president, that's not looking like we're getting to parity anytime soon. And historically, possibly never ever going to get there, because, of course, you've had all of those years of men, for us it's about 140, slightly under 140 men, and then 4 women. But what you want is a situation where in future you've opened up the route for women. So 3 of those women presidents in ICAEW have been since 2016. So the pace is rapidly changing. Now, if I'm honest, the next 3 presidents will be men, because we know who the next 3 presidents will be already. But hopefully we will then get, some more females, and that's only one aspect of diversity. But I think if we measure and if we look and think, well, what is it that's a barrier? Is it people not wanting to get involved? Is it that there are invisible barriers? Is it that there are visible barriers? And this is a complex place. And, a lot of the research being done shows that there are so many hidden barriers to what happens, because we have a way of working which is, dare I say it, quite male-centric, if we just concentrate on the gender for a moment. And it means that women find themselves at a disadvantage at certain points in their professional career.
No, I mean, I think it's a continual journey, and it always will be. So from an accountancy point of view, I take tax in that. But we've faced some staff and skills shortages recently, and obviously that's leading to rising salaries, but it's also leading to the fact that we are desperately trying to recruit more people into the profession. And you mentioned at the beginning that obviously we need to make it attractive to people to join. So I don't know, how do you think we're going to do that in future? What are the things that you think would help?
For people coming in, we have got a very different world today. And I think concentrating or getting the message out about the wider strategic themes, about the importance of accountancy in good economies. We ultimately need sustainable economies. And that's, the ICAEW vision is enabling a world of sustainable economies. And if people can understand that their role as a tax advisor, as an auditor, as an accountant, all of that contributes to the economy in a wider sense, contributes to society's running well. And if we add on to that layer of, yes, but we've got to have sustainable societies, we've got to have sustainable economies, because otherwise there's not going to be much of a planet left. We're already seeing some, quite stark reminders of what's happening in terms of extreme weather events across the world over the last several years. So if we can show people that this is a really purposeful profession, this isn't about getting a calculator out and adding up numbers, because let's face it, the software does that. This is not bookkeeping. Accountancy is about a broader understanding of data, of technology, of economies, of advising businesses, charities, other organizations, governments. How can we move forward? How does measuring things help us to manage them? Because we're going to have a whole load of stuff, on the tax side, on sustainability, for instance, there's going to be, well, there already are, there's tax credits or there's tax charges for doing things which are either good or bad from a sustainability point of view. Are they properly joined up yet? Well, no. And for a young person or somebody looking at their second career, perhaps coming in as a potential accountant, say, wow, this isn't about number crunching. This is about enabling a better world. This is about having a purpose and driving forward sustainability. This is about tech and data and being able to analyze and understand and play back to a business. Well, this bit's good, this bit's not so good. Wow, you've got a huge risk or a huge hole over here. You might want to do something, because I can see that from the data analytics. So I think if we could get across that excitement of the profession, I think that's a really big side of it. And the other side of it to me is that link in with the diversity. We can't just fish in those same talent pools that we fished in over a number of years. It has to be a Russell Group university. You have to have had good A levels. I didn't have good A levels. It doesn't mean you haven't got the capability. You don't want to write people off just because at a particular age they didn't get a particular exam. So it's about that diverse talent and appealing to everybody and showing them that this is a career that, if they're interested, if they're passionate about these things, then it's a career that would be great for them.
I think it helps also if you've got passionate people talking about it like you are. So, because I think it's highly unusual for somebody to go down the list on the A to Z for careers and go, oh, I'll do that. So, and still be doing it. Talking a bit now about the future and where we're going. So we've had, regulators saying that there ought to be some major reforms because of conflicts of interest in the profession. So I'd be interested to see where you think that's going. But you've mentioned also tech in there, and obviously, you can't help but know now that we've got so many more sophisticated AI tools out there. And how do you see the role perhaps of accountants changing with that tech now?
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, conflicts of interest will always be a challenge. And we've got, more news, very sadly, about further conflicts with some of the papers in Australia from the firm there, where it was incorrect usage of information gained in a confidential situation. And you think, well, no, we should be able to avoid this. We should be able to deal with it. And by and large, of course, we do, because the reality is most accountants are very trusted by their advisors. Most of the time, everything is good. And we need to not lose sight of the fact that mostly, because of this ethical framework, because of the concentration on that, accountants, members of professional bodies are very good at saying, oh, gosh, yes, I shouldn't do that because there's a conflict. Sometimes things go wrong. Now, AI then brings in a whole other layer of things, because on the one hand, you still got the risks of conflict, of incorrect information. AI has somebody described them once to me as being a bit like a teenager. They're really confident about their view, but they might be entirely wrong, because they can pick up, all of the information that's out there, latch onto something, decide it's right, come up with a really well-honed way of saying it, even though it's utter rot. So we've got an ethical issue with AI. We've got to be careful. The data on which it is trained is the data that we'll use. So there's a danger, whether it's talking about audit decisions or tax decisions or whatever, that AI gets trained on the wrong data and therefore comes up with the wrong answers. So we've got to have an understanding of how we deal with that from an ethical point of view. From a practical point of view, I mean, the latest changes and advances in ChatGPT are almost off the scale. So I think we all knew it was getting there. We've all seen AI gradually get better, but this was another big leap forward. And we've got AI passing sort of US CPA exams, the US qualification exams. Now, obviously, that's only an exam. There's a big difference between passing an exam and being able to do something in practice. But we will have to really carefully consider, well, what impact does this have on what the profession does? Will this take over the roles of a professional? For years, we've wondered, does the accountant find themselves out of a job? Strangely, what we've actually seen is more and more demand for accountants, because although they're not doing that bookkeeping, they're not doing that transactional stuff, they're not doing the tax computations a lot of the time because the software's doing that, you're pushing the boundaries all the time. So you need more judgment, you need more human aspects to try and make sure, what happens next. It's really difficult to see what new jobs will arise. You can see quite easily what old jobs might disappear. But if you keep reinventing yourself, if you keep learning, then I think as a profession, we've still got a good future.
I think it's going to, be interesting as well how we then train people up in the profession where perhaps some of the roles, are different going forward.
Training be really important, because one of the points that people, we keep coming back to in committees and whatever is, if you're not doing what we might call the drudge work, doing the tax computations, doing the incomplete records or whatever, can you accelerate yourself to just doing those higher end judgmental things without having had that background? And I suspect we can do it, but it might need quite a fundamental shift in the way that we train people. How do we take people from, but you do need to do the judgments, you do need to know when you're looking at something that's sensible, not sensible, and so on. So I think that we'll need a revolution in training in order to get the best out.
During my presidential year, one of the things I've continually heard from members is that they have issues with HMRC service level. But is there anything else particularly that you think is something members are particularly concerned about at the moment?
The service levels are a huge issue, because on the one hand, I think you've got HMRC trying to take us to a digital world where it's all self-service, it's all easy, everything integrates, it a nirvana of tax world, if you like. But the trouble is, we're not starting where some other countries have been able to start, which is much later down the line, and just introduce, I don't know, a cloud-based, up-to-date system without any legacy. So they've tried, and this is lots of us go down this route as well, to take what they had in an old analog world, and they've tried to squeeze it into a digital world, and they've taken some of the support things away much too soon in terms of the level of support. And it's leading to huge practical issues, because as you say, the service standards are so poor that you can barely get anything done. It's literally like getting stuck in the mud. And we have heard that they're taking sort of 40 people off the VAT registration helpline, which you think, oh my goodness, but that will mean even less people answering those questions, but actually getting them to fill the form in so that the people don't have to ring up to say, why haven't you registered me for VAT? But really, I think, one of our thoughts is that you need to go back to basics. You need to simplify. Our system is just too complex. And that's why we need so many agents on helplines, because everybody's like, well, I don't want to make a mistake on tax. The penalties, whether they're civil or criminal, are really big penalties. I don't want to get it wrong. So people get nervous, so they want to check. But if you make it simpler in the first place, if you make it more digital by design, then it should be easier. So I think we would really like much more simplification. VAT, the 50th birthday for VAT this year. And that whole range of different things that we've got for different rates and different schemes for different types of industry. And I'm sure, CIOT share these views that a much bigger sort of simplification project would reap dividends for everybody involved. Tax is complicated, but it doesn't necessarily need to be quite as complicated as we've maybe designed it.
Perhaps for a bit of fun, taking that a step further, if we imagine a world in which you're in charge of the tax system or accounting system, what's the first thing that you might like to change, whether in law or practice?
There are things about the tax system, which aren't gender equal. Now, we did make ours a bit more gender equal by sort of getting rid of the way that we used to deal with married couples. But nonetheless, right from the start, we have, and if you link pensions into it, because, that we do get tax relief on pensions, so it does all link together. We've got automatic enrolment, but only if your job earns you, over £10,000. Forgive me if the numbers aren't quite right or whatever. But if you've got 3 jobs, each earning you a bit of that, but in total you're earning over that, then there's no auto enrolment. But the reality is a lot more women will have 3 little jobs, because that's what they're doing to fit around caring for children, caring for elderly relatives or whatever else, than men. So actually you get an unequal split. You get capital taxes at different rates to income taxes. And largely speaking, capital still tends to be more owned by men than by women, despite obviously the ability for women to own capital, which is great. We shouldn't even be saying that. But of course, if you go back not that far in history, women weren't allowed to own property. And then you can see how these build up over a lot of years, where nobody even thinks that there's a gender bias in policy. Nobody even realizes. And I think, for me, if I was in charge of tax, in charge of the accounting system, I'd look and say, okay, how can we make sure that we've got a tax system which takes into account gender in a way which is positive? Sometimes that might mean more progressive taxation, certain areas. It might mean different approaches, different ways of dealing with tax credits. Even simple things like, if you go back to child benefit, used to be a cash in hand payment. I remember going to get my mum's child benefit when I was a kid, cash in hand payment to the mother. It's got spent on different things when it went into the hands of the mother than it did when it went into the hands of the father. So there's quite a lot of underlying work that I would be quite keen. And there's interesting, there's a CFE ICAEW event, a gender equal tax system in Europe, reflections for a new agenda, on the 4th of July this year, which is looking at a gender equal tax system in Europe. And, what should you be doing about that? How should you achieve it? So I think that's, that's one of the big things. And I think that whole going back to basics on tax systems, if you can, really try and be ruthless. Somebody, well, it has to be a politician who is happy to stand up and say, it doesn't matter that I might be out of office in 4 years, 2 years, whatever. This is important for the economy on a long-term basis. This is worth doing now, because it will reap long-term dividends. So not thinking about themselves, and I'm sure lots of them don't just think about themselves, but thinking about the future of the prosperity of the country and making big steps to say, let's really make tax simpler. That would be what I would try.
Well, let's hope we can wave that magic wand and see if we can achieve that. But it's probably a really good place to finish. So thank you very much, Julia Penny. That's certainly given us a lot of food for thought. And let's hope it encourages more people to get involved in the institutes and join the profession. Thank you.
Let's hope so. Thank you, Susan. It's been a pleasure.
If you would like to contact us and talk tax, you can find us on www.rsmuk.com. And our contact details are on the show notes. To stay in the loop, just subscribe to The Loop, We're always keen to hear your views, so please rate us and leave a review. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode.